fact that Arkansas already has Auburn, Alabama, A&M, LSU, and then they get those two, we still think that the West is better than the East, top to bottom, even though the East is a little bit deeper this year than it has been. Vanderbilt's just not going to be a good football team. And then you add to that, what's Mississippi State really going to look like? Does that offense get going? I mean, they got a veteran quarterback that could be pulling the trigger.
Yeah. And
then we know Lane Kiffin can dial up plays, and he's going to have a ton of young talent on that offense. Overall difficulty, I might agree with you that Arkansas probably got it worse. Hey, this is Cubelic with ESPN and WJOX, and you're listening to The Morning Rush.
Hour number 3 of the Morning Rush, welcoming our next guest, former offensive lineman, ESPNer, and SEC Network, as well as WJOX in Birmingham, Alabama. Cole Cubelic is our next guest. Cole, I know that was you on ESPN 104.5 down there in Baton Rouge talking about Arkansas' schedule. Appreciate you making some time for us this morning, man.
No, I appreciate you guys having me. Look forward to talking some football.
Cole, if you're Sam Pittman and you already know what is facing you this upcoming football season, and then you get the either email or text of what your schedule is, what is your initial reaction to seeing Georgia and Florida adding to your schedule?
I mean, I think probably what my reaction just was, you kind of laugh it off and you just say, let's go compete. Knowing Sam and knowing his demeanor, his attitude, he's not a guy that's going to go complain. He's not a guy that's going to moan or bitch or cry. He's just going to say, hey, man, this is what it is, and these are the ways that we're going to have to go about finding ways to be competitive. You got to go get better. You got to hit the weight room, got to condition. We need to study film. You need to know the playbook. You need to know your assignments. You need to know the checks. You need to know how to verbalize things. So I think for him it'll be more strategy, understanding that he's got to find a way to get talent to compete in this league on a regular basis. But this year, what are the strengths? You got a couple of young, talented wide receivers. You've got a stud at tailback. You got a quarterback that's got some experience in this league. So find a way to work around some things. But I think there may have been some coaches in this league, and it was reported that some guys were upset and complaining and moaning. Sam Pittman was not that guy. It's just not who he is. It's not his attitude. I think he probably just turned the page and said, well, you know what? We're going to work today anyway. So now we're going to work with a couple more difficult opponents on our schedule. Doesn't really change much for him.
Cole, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on this morning is because you have a unique perspective, not only cover the SEC on a daily basis, but, dude, you're a former offensive lineman. So when you see Sam Pittman named as the head coach, when you see his background with what he can do with offensive linemen, how important is it for him to establish the trenches at Arkansas, and what kind of trench play do you think you're going to see for him, not on the offensive line, but the defensive line, man?
Well, you guys have seen it. I mean, he's been there before. And you know what it was like then. So I would anticipate it to be similar to that. I don't know necessarily how important it was for the trench play at Arkansas, but I mean for guys like me who are former offensive linemen who love offensive line play, study that, just to see a guy who that's his background, to get that opportunity, to get that chance, that was cool to see. And then I just love it for Sam because I think he's a great human being. And there's not a lot of guys that are lifers as a position coach that get these kind of opportunities. And I think he understands that. I think he knows that. And I think he'll take advantage of that. Now, is there going to be an emphasis on that position? Heck yeah, there is, because that's sort of his go-to. That's his specialty. And I would anticipate that he'll be down there working with the offensive linemen before every practice, just like Ed Orgeron goes down and works with the D-line first few periods of practice every day. That's what he knows he's good at. So he's not going to get away from it. Just like when Matt Luke was the head coach at Ole Miss last year. I mean, he'd go work with the O-line because he's a former offensive lineman. So I think it gives Arkansas an advantage as far as development at that position. There will be more quality coaches spending more time with that group, and that's a good thing. Yeah. Still got to go get the bodies, and he's been able to do it before, so he'll know how to do it again. Some of those relationships that he's made when he's been at other schools are obviously going to be extremely valuable now. In fact, he's been there before is going to be valuable, but he's going to place an emphasis on that position. And like you said, be it O-line and D-line. I think one advantage that he has, though, is his offensive coordinator understands. And the thing about Kendall is he still runs first. Now, I've had lengthy conversations about Jarrett Stidham when he was at Baylor and the misconceptions of that offense. Yeah, they're going to take their shots. They're going to stretch the field. But they have a way of finding creative formations to get you in situations defensively that makes life easier to run the football. And I think you'll see some of that. It could be using tempo and pace. It could be just the wide receiver splits. It could be the amount of times they stretch the field vertically. But they're going to do things schematically that stress you and allow you to have better opportunities to run the ball. So I think one advantage that he'll have early on is, it's not just going to be lining up at 22 personnel and trying to ram the ball down people's throats. I think they're a little bit smarter and more creative than that.
Yeah. Cole, I wanted to ask you about toughness because we've had a lot of discussions about the lack of toughness the last couple of years at Arkansas, and I want to kind of get your perspective as you look at games each week, prepare for different SEC games and your assignments, what you saw when looking at Arkansas and their frontline play. It hasn't been to the level of physicality and toughness that Arkansas had built a reputation for. Just your evaluation of that and what actually, because Sam knows how to do it, but what has to occur this year and beyond just recruiting and the development to get that physicality and that toughness back?
I think the first thing is personality. And it's what kind of guys are you bringing in? Are you bringing in guys that want to play that way, that understand how to play that way, maybe a little less talented, but you can develop them? I think you go watch Georgia's offensive line the last few years, and you see the way that Cade Mays is throwing people around and Trey Hill's throwing people around. I mean, those guys, they played a certain way, even though they were super talented, but they had a way about them. And I think Sam knows how to help bring that out in guys, but that starts with recruiting the right guys first and foremost. We talk all the time in offensive line circles about how you'd much rather have to coach a little bit of nasty out of a guy than try to coach a lot of nasty into a guy. Because that second one doesn't really happen very often. That's tough to do. So I think you'll understand the kind of guy to get. I think they were hampered a little bit with the system the last few years. I mean, that's not one that really, when you're going heavy RPO and you're spreading things out, you're a lot of zone read stuff, that's not going to, you're not able to really impose your will on people, and you're not able to be that kind of a player. And, even though I think there will be spread principles involved in what they do, the head coach kind of sets the tone for everything. And Sam is not going to let there be a tone of being soft or, position blocking or finesse blocking. That's just not in his DNA. So it may take a year or two to begin to really get there. But the other challenge is going to be, you can want to do it and preach it and kind of coach it all you want, but this particular season it's going to be really tough, considering the fact that you got to go in there with no spring ball. Now you got a new coach, new system, and I think personally, this is my opinion, I think most of these fall camps, the guys are going to be tiptoeing through these things. You're going to be on eggshells because you're probably going to have positive COVID tests and lose some guys for a certain amount of time there. You're going to have some guys that opt out, and then because you're just physically not acclimated to what you're going to be asked to do, you're going to lose some guys. Oklahoma's already lost 3 guys for season-ending injuries. We saw South Carolina lose a tailback yesterday. So I think there'll be more injuries than we've seen in the past. So I think a lot of these coaches are probably going to back off just in hopes that they can get something in once they start the season. So I think this will be even more of a challenge to bring that out in a lot of guys this year because you just haven't been able to rep it. You haven't been able to work it the way that you wanted to. And college football has already subtracted a lot of that anyway, which makes it even more of a challenge.
You mentioned the lack of spring football, the apprehensions in camp, just the chaos of the world we're in right now. For the 4 programs that Arkansas is one of, Missouri, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, how big a disadvantage is it this year to have all of this other stuff that we just mentioned melting into the pot here, and you're trying to install new offense, new defense, new culture, new whatever? How big a disadvantage is it in this particular circumstance, in your opinion?
Well, it is for everybody. And like you said, the coaches who are trying to do things in a new way, Mississippi State, I think especially, just because of how different that's going to be when you're talking about splits, alignment, where you want your motions to be, where routes are busted off. Again, I'll go back to, and I haven't heard a lot of people talk about this, but I was very curious about, and I used to actually annoy Jared Stidham a lot because he and I got to be pretty good friends when he played at Auburn, but I was really anxious just about how and why that Baylor offense was so successful. So I would ask him about it often. And, people talk a lot of times about that Leach offense and, there's only 6 plays. Well, I had Mike Leach on my show in Birmingham, and I asked him straight up, do you have 6 or 8 plays in your offense? And he gave us about a 5-minute answer that said, no, absolutely not. That might be the baseline of the offense, but when you start talking about attachments and checks and different routes and RPOs and things that you can change, it becomes pretty complex. That system at Baylor is not super complex. It can be run in a very simplistic manner. Now, obviously, that depends on the guy pulling the trigger and the guy who's running it and who you have around you. But I think Kendall has a way of understanding, how to make that thing go that's not going to be super complicated. And again, you got a tailback that you can lean on. We know Rakeem Boyd is super talented. And you got a quarterback that at least has experience in the league and a young, talented group of receivers. So that's a pretty good starting point. And there may be, I don't think we find this out until we get going, but there may be something to, especially with these new offenses, the extra time that the coaches had to spend just watching film with these guys, all these Zoom meetings that they had of conceptually understanding football, understanding why you're doing something and how it affects the other side of the field, or how it might affect something 2 plays later or 4 quarters later or two series later. You don't spend a lot of time on that. And there's not a lot of coaches that have the time to say, hey, man, when we run counter here, let me show you why we're running this. Just because the defense is lined up this way and we want to get them into this. Or when you throw a route a certain way, to be able to explain, why a different receiver is running a guy off so you can set something up later in the game. All of those things mesh together, but you don't have a ton of time to really explain the hows and whys they mesh together. So maybe some of that gives these teams an advantage. The reality is you hadn't had a ton of time on the football field together, and that's always going to make things difficult.
Cole Cubelic with us on the Morning Rush, ESPN and College Football Network analyst there over at SEC Network as well. Cole, I got a chance to talk with Jared Stidham at SEC Media Days and had the connection. My dad went to Baylor. I saw a few of his games, not only in person, but obviously on TV. We actually got a chance to catch up with Seth Russell, another Baylor quarterback, and what they told me is this is a offense that you want to play in, that you can put up Heisman-type numbers. Just seeing what Feleipe Franks was able to do at Florida, I know he's inconsistent at times. Cole, what are your thoughts on how Feleipe Franks can be in this Kendall Briles offense?
Well, I think a couple of things can help him is that, number one, the reads can be simplified, whether it's half fields or whether it's just one and go. I mean, there's a lot of, hey, if we get a one-on-one, we're throwing the deep ball. I mean, it's that easy. And because they're going to force you to respect it. And that's what opens up the run game a lot of times. I think the fact that you're going into a season with a guy that understands the speed of the game, that knows the speed of the game, that understands, what it's about, and even the environmental part of it, you don't have to worry about probably, because it's not like these stadiums are going to be full and he's going to have to be dealing with crowd noise on the road and that kind of deal. Mm-hmm. He can, I think when you talk about stretching the field, I mean, obviously we've all seen, the final pass against Tennessee, when the kid's rolling to his right and throws it 74 yards or whatever it was. I mean, the guy's got the arm to be able to stretch any defense, anywhere. Mm-hmm. So those shots are going to be taken. I think he's pretty durable. He's got good mobility. His mobility was something that Dan Mullen and John Hevesy told me the first time we had him at Florida when he was there, is that they were completely excited about the way he could run, or what kind of runner they thought he could be. So it's just an added dimension that you might be able to utilize, but his experience should be big. And I think he's got every bit of talent to be able to be a big-time quarterback in this league. He's just got to have sort of that Jason Campbell moment when he was at Auburn of, being paired with a guy that knows how to speak his language. Mm-hmm. And when that happens, I think he's got an opportunity to really take off.
All right, Cole, before we let you go, one of the things Arkansas fans were really excited to see is you list Treylon Burks as your SEC breakout player. Why do you think he's going to be that, man?
I just think he's got legit juice. I mean, he's a guy that can get over the top. He's a guy that can hurt you in the open field. Really good hands, good route runner. There's a bunch of good receivers in this league. But he's one probably because of the team that he plays on that does not get enough attention. And for me, when you're gonna talk about guys who know how to separate and be different and offer something extra, you got to have explosiveness, and that's what I see with him. I mean, he's a guy who has elite explosive ability, and I think they're going to find ways to utilize that, and I think he's going to have a big year.
Cole Cubelic, SEC Network and ESPN college football analyst, also radio host of Three Man Front over at the Jocks in Birmingham, Alabama. Cole, thanks so much for making some time this morning, man. Excited for college football to get underway next month.
Hey, man, thanks for having me.